Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to Utah Stories. This is something brand new we're trying out. This is a virtual town hall, and my guest tonight is Taymour Semnani. He is running for City Council District 6. It's a very important election. I hope a lot of you go out and vote because we need to change things. We need to shake things up. Thanks for joining me, Taymour.
Thanks for having me. I'm your guinea pig, huh?
Yeah, you're the guinea pig. Yeah, so it's like we've done this once before with Rocky Anderson. About 30 people showed up, chimed in. You know, your questions are what are the most important function of this live stream. And so we want to hear from you. You know, what are your concerns with the city? What do you want to see happen and change? How do you want to see Salt Lake City shaped for the next decade and coming years? As we've seen, the city has changed dramatically, and just in the last 4 years, it's like the skyline's completely changed. And I want to just start off by showing a clip of who ends up being the greatest victim of this change. This is a clip of a homeless senior who is 62 years old, was priced out of the housing market. He had found himself homeless. He couldn't get into another affordable housing unit. But this is quite ironic because right behind where we're interviewing is an affordable housing complex that's been under construction for 3 years. Let's go ahead and play that clip, Troy. So this is Dawn. I just did an interview earlier, but I want to point out something quite odd. This says future home of 500 West Apartments. I mean, all these containers.
And they've been there for 4 to 5 years, just like that.
Just like that, like a couple hundred affordable housing units. Here you are homeless, all these people.
And they're doing embankments on us because we're on public property.
Yeah, they're coming in here, busting up, taking all your things, all your belongings if you're not around.
If you're not here and you're off to an appointment or trying to get something to eat.
Okay, we'll stop there. They're going to take all your things. What's your comment on that, Taymour? What's happening with the city between the Ramada Inn not turning into affordable housing that just didn't happen, the pods that mayor ordered, $10,000 a piece, they're sitting in there in an empty lot, nobody's going in, it's supposed to open at November 1st. And affordable housing not being built, just not progressing. What's your opinion? How would you weigh in on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, unfortunately, we're seeing a breakdown in the solutions and the proposed solutions that we're putting forth for the most vulnerable population, and it's trickling to stakeholders citywide, from taxpayers who are living in the city to business owners who are trying to run businesses in the city, and then the most vulnerable amongst us, the homeless population. So there are a lot of good ideas, but you have to get past ideas and you have to get to execution. And execution is the tough part. Everybody's got good ideas, but the question is, how do you actually make it happen? And so that's where I think he's falling victim. He's an exemplar of those who are falling victim to our inability to execute, not just come up with good ideas, not just put a good brand on it, not just put a good label on it, but actually get it done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I looked further into the Ramada Inn, which was supposed to be 400 affordable, deep, permanent supportive housing units, and the parking lot around it was supposed to be potentially sanctioned camp and campers. And everybody wanted to place all of the blame on the developer, Keith Warburton, who got awarded $2 million grant from the city, $2 million RDA loan, free building. And I've learned that basically the city did not want to put any sort of timeline or effort into helping him fast track the project when the project was getting delayed. There was no sort of initiative to say, how do we move this along so we stay on schedule? And like you said, the execution of that and that pod system, it just completely has not been there. And I look at what happened now. That Ramada property has rumored to have sold to the Miller family because they're going to build a ballpark to the west of it. They don't care. They just seem to, that was supposed to be, there's going to be people outside sleeping in the winter. All the shelters are full. I mean, I hate to beat this horse so much, but it seems like that is the number one biggest issue, why business owners are suffering, why residents are suffering. A lot of people in District 6 don't live downtown, but they work downtown. And I know a lot of people, they don't want to be there when it's late at night at all. You don't want to be. There's a lot of people who just don't have any place to stay. I mean, what sort of drastic actions should we take? Do you think it's almost time to declare a state of emergency?
Wow. And there are two stakeholders that I just want to quickly address that you mentioned, and then let's make sure to answer that question. Number one is any business should do what's right by their bottom line. So, but the city needs to do what they can to incentivize businesses to get the project done. The second stakeholder that I want to address is District 6 families. You're right that a lot of these issues don't exist in District 6, but we are majority families in District 6. And I do remember a time in Salt Lake where I used to go downtown as a child, and I used to go to Liberty Park, and I used to go to Pioneer Park, and I used to go to jazz games. And life was pretty good, but life was also really safe downtown. Mm-hmm. And that's not it's not a place, it's going to lose a lot of family traffic. We are not going to have families feel like they're safe going downtown. And that's a heartbreak for everyone. Mm-hmm. So, sorry, now that I've addressed those stakeholders, what was your initial question?
I mean, what sort of emergency measures could we take so that, unlike last winter, where 15 people died and multiple people also lost limbs and fingers and toes, how do we keep people from dying and there's a lot of people sleeping outside right now. Luckily, it's warm right now, unseasonably warm in November.
Yeah, and unfortunately, even when we do get people inside, there's still dangers they face in affordable housing, deeply affordable housing. I would say the biggest thing that we can do, our city, the state has signaled in the last legislative session, and they've signaled it again this legislative session. They'll make money available. They will give the city money. But we have to put a good plan in front of them. It's not just money with no plan. We have to, as a municipality, as policymakers, put a plan in front of the state that they can buy into. Mm-hmm. If we go back,
and that sanction camp was supposed to be that plan. Everybody signed off on it.
Yep.
Everybody's like, yes, this is it. And then they say they can't find an operator.
Right.
So it was supposed to open November 1st, but they can't find anybody to operate it.
Right.
So interesting. That was just not successful.
Right. And we watched the state come in and I mean, Operation Rio Grande was within the municipality. I'm going back, 5 or 6 years now, maybe more. But it was run by the Highway Patrol. It was really, I remember watching it happen over a course of months.
It was kind of orchestrated by some state legislators,
right,
including like the speaker at the time, and who it's interesting. These guys are all developer/politicians.
Right.
Greg Hughes was the speaker at the time, and he had apartments.
That's
around
some history,
there.
Greg Hughes.
And then Wayne Niederhauser, big, huge developer/politician, Utah's homeless coordinator. I don't know why he has that job. I'd love to ask him.
Yeah.
Like what qualifies you as one of the biggest developers, politicians? But it just seems like they cannot, like you said, execute. We have now this huge Astra Tower. It's got like 42 stories. It's beautiful high-rise residential apartment. Now on schedule. They put the last beam in. All these residential towers. Those are obviously priorities. But affordable housing for the working class poor, restaurants downtown are really struggling hiring servers, cooks, dishwashers, because nobody can afford to live down there. Mm-hmm. We talked about this last time. Obviously that needs to be done, but how do you help make that more of a priority?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we can do is put forth an organized plan. You touched on this right when we first started talking, which was there's a lot of good ideas, but there's not adequate coordination to execute them. And there is, contrary to popular belief, the state has signaled they will make the resources available. The reason we got the city requested $100 million, they got $55 million in the last session. It's because they put together a plan in front of the legislature that effectively said, your plan, you've justified $55 million, so we'll give that to you. But we don't want to just hand you $100 million and not know where it's going.
Yeah, makes a lot of. I mean,
and the governor has pretty blatantly said that as a capital city, we need to do a better job representing our state. That as the first thing people see when they fly to Utah, we need to do a better job representing our state. Now, I may not agree with everything that our legislature or our governor does, but there's a lot of money available, and I'd like to see the city get their hands on that money. And it is clear to me that there is merit to we're not managing our city right. I do agree with that. I think most voters, if you've been in Salt Lake for more than 10 years, you can look at the changes that have happened in Salt Lake, and you can pretty confidently say we're not managing a lot of important assets correctly here.
Yeah.
So there's a theory called the theory of constraints, and it talks about that it's the idea that the execution is in managing your resources, not the ideas that you apply your resources to. Everyone has great ideas. The question is, how do you execute? And I'd like to see us come up with a better plan to execute.
So if you examine the failure of first the Ramada, then the sanctioned campground, what was missing in your mind from those plans? Like where did the city council, the mayor's office just go wrong?
I would start with what requirements the RDA put on closing on the loan. So I think, number one, we would have liked to see a development plan for the asset. So actual plans. How are you a construction schedule? Understood which builders were going to be involved in building the asset, and then having a construction schedule, which is basically, here's when you're going to get your permits, here's when you're going to excavate, here's when you're going to build, and here's when you're going to inspect. I would have liked to see that. If the RDA has a really big budget, and the RDA gets to decide who to give that money to and in what form, whether it's in the form of a grant, whether it's in the form of a construction loan, the RDA gets to decide that. It should expect more of the applicant, and the applicants are probably willing to provide it.
And Switchpoint fully executed. I mean, they were given two big grants, and they executed both the point plan very, very well, and then the one on the other side that's further south, and it's like. It just boggles my mind that this happened this way, because it should have been such a huge priority, I would think, for the mayor to think, there's all these people on the street. If we got rid of 400 of them, the streets would be a lot safer, cleaner, better for business, and it just now I'm finding out from an inside source. I couldn't verify this till just yesterday. Keith Warburton, he was given the Ramada building on a 30-year land lease. So I thought, there's no way he made any money on it because he didn't own the land. But it turns out that building, the structural value of it, him now selling it to a developer, he stands to make millions of dollars for not developing the property. How is that okay? How is that not corruption?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that. I don't know the background of that, so I'd be hard pressed to comment on it.
Yeah,
honestly.
It's something I
But
couldn't
I hear that. I empathize with the frustration. I just don't know the ins and outs
it's
of
amazing. But let's talk about District 6. So District 6 consists of Bonneville Hills, the East Bench, Sunnyside East, Wasatch Hollow, Yellcrest, east of the land basically east of 1500 East. Really nice areas around the U of U campus. Around above Foothill Boulevard. What would you say your biggest challenges are for just the neighborhoods in District 6?
So are we talking, you named a lot of wonderful neighborhoods there. Are we talking just those, the neighborhoods in aggregate, or an individual neighborhood?
I would say as much as possible in aggregate. I mean, it's a lot. It's a pretty vast area. I mean, above Foothill Boulevard and Sunnyside, and then Yellcrest area. Are there any particular challenges to those neighborhoods? They're all built out. They were built obviously a lot of years ago.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the area you kind of just that you're going to represent. Is there anything particular to that separate from downtown Salt Lake City?
Yeah. So challenges within I'll name two. One is a challenge within the geographic boundaries of District 6, and then one is a challenge for stakeholders who are in District 6. Mm-hmm. I would say the primary challenge within the geographic boundaries of District 6 is the affordability of ownership. So a family who wants to buy a house in District 6, who wants to buy a house to put their family in, that to me is the number one challenge. That there are a lot of facets to that. Is
there any place to build still in District 6?
Not really. There's a couple. There's a lot by the Top Stop, where the Red Robin and the Top Stop are on the west side of that lot, and there's conversation of that being an apartment development. And there's, I know the university. The university is struggling with how to provide enough housing for its students, and also I don't think a lot of people understand this, but also provide enough housing for a really big staff base, which is everything from administration to the athletic department, and most importantly, I would say to District Sixers is staff and providers at the hospital. So people like my wife, who's a cardiac ICU nurse, on her $45 an hour pay, she would not be able to afford to live in District 6, but for us being married and having dual incomes. Mm-hmm. So I would say that's probably the number one challenge within the geographic boundaries of District 6. I would say the number one issue that is on voters' minds in District 6 is homelessness. Mm-hmm. So we don't experience the problem the way that that downtown experiences it, mm-hmm. but we are all working downtown. We're all playing downtown, and we're all very concerned about vulnerable populations. I always talk about how when you transitional homelessness is a different issue, but when we talk about chronic homelessness, addicts, people who are experiencing suffering from addiction and mental health disease, these are people who come oftentimes from middle class families. Mm-hmm. So it is very much all the facets of homelessness impact District Sixers.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing that I can see happening along 21st East and 21st South, you had the Blue Plate Diner, cultural institution. Everybody loved it. Amazing diner and total gentrification. I mean, obviously that big, apartment building will add a lot of units to that is your district, right?
Yeah, it is. It's right on the boundary.
Yeah, and it's huge and a massive thing, but the same thing that happened there happened in Sugar House, where you got a great local business. I think those other ones had been boarded up for years because the developer bought them a lot sooner.
You're talking about on 11th East and was it 21st South there?
Yeah. So that was like 20 local businesses were lost.
Yeah.
This area, if the Chinese restaurant and the other restaurant to the east of it, I don't know what it was, and Blue Plate Diner are now victims of gentrification. Yeah. Is there anything you can do to stop or prevent gentrification?
No. Well, you're as a policymaker, you're constantly asked to make what may feel like picking a winner and a loser. I don't necessarily think that's a case. I think that you can have scenarios where both parties are winning. I don't like I'm not going to be a candidate who cites a housing development where it just doesn't fit with the character of the neighborhood, and where it kills an institution like the Blue Plate Diner. I'll admit my favorite breakfast place is outside the district. It's actually maybe in Mill Creek. It's over the counter. I don't know if you've been over.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah,
over the
it's
counter
really
is
good.
amazing. But I'll support District 6 businesses first going forward. So I don't think that these are if-then picking winners and losers.
They had to apply for a zoning change to make that happen.
Yeah.
And that did have to be approved by the city council. And it's all super high-end luxury Is it apartments or condominiums? Do you know?
I think they're apartments for rent. I don't think they're condominiums.
Yeah.
And the zoning would not have addressed that. So I think the justification oftentimes in the council has been we need to add more housing supply.
Mm-hmm.
But we're not thinking about adding family housing units. We're not requiring when we'll kind of do this token requirement of, you have to build a certain mix affordable.
Mm-hmm.
But that doesn't mean that it's 2 beds where a family can live in it. That doesn't mean that if we're actually going to impact the rental rates and provide enough supply to make a significant difference in the market.
Which it doesn't look like it will.
No, I mean we're trying to mop up a fire hose spill with paper towels. It's and oftentimes I feel like it's we're offering a little too much and not getting enough back for it when we make zoning concessions.
Yeah. So let's talk about your challenger. Let's start with your James Alfondra. He says he wants to focus on creating vibrant neighborhoods, create healthy, sustainable communities. He says he has 15 years of leadership experience, and he wants to make District 6, I suppose, more walkable, better for pedestrians and bicycles. He says he wants to create a modern, robust trail system. How would you compare and contrast your vision with James's?
I think the easiest way to contrast our visions is to pull up my issues tab and pull up his issues tab. And this goes for all the candidates. Pull up my issues tab and put them side by side with the other 2 candidates. And just compare what you're seeing. Oftentimes candidates, as voters, we're not holding our candidates to a high enough bar. Tell us what your policies are. Tell us what you're going to do about a certain problem. Any candidate who can get up there and say, I like kids, and I think that we should be able to bike everywhere, and I think that parks are really nice, and I like trails, and I like outdoors. But what are you actually going to do about them? Mm-hmm. So when we talk about housing, what are the candidates going to do about them? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find an actual policy position on. So to answer, how do you contrast myself with the other 2 candidates? Put my issues tab side by side with the other candidates' issues tabs, and let our issues tabs speak for themselves.
Because you believe your policies can be executed and theirs can't?
I believe that I actually stated policy positions, whereas the other candidates did not state any policy positions. They stated opinions of what they like.
And like things everybody likes.
Yeah.
Like, I like trails.
Yeah.
I do too. I like walking. I like to
Exactly.
parks. Yeah.
It makes it easy. I think, and unfortunately, this is a phenomenon across our country where candidates are just trying to be really friendly and not say anything and be really. They want
easily placated.
Placate, exactly.
Yeah.
But because they're afraid that they may lose votes because somebody disagrees with you. Well, I really want voters to know what their vote gets with me. Mm-hmm. So I want you to know what I stand for. And then I want you to be able to reach out to me and say, hey, Taymour, I agree with this, this, and this. This I've got a different opinion on. Here's my experience, and explain it to me. Mm-hmm. But you can't do that if you're being really mushy and really vague.
Yeah.
So that's why you go to my issues tab. I address specifically fourplexes. I address specifically auxiliary dwelling units. I address specifically homelessness. I address specifically policing with budget numbers. I'm just trying to remember. There's 8 or 9 issues tabs, and I've made the offer. If anyone feels like I haven't addressed an issue that's important to them, tell me about it. I'll get it up on my website so you know where I stand on the issue.
And again, this what we're doing tonight is all about asking Taymour. So if you're watching this recorded, which I assume a lot more people will be able to do because it's a busy time of night, you can ask him. He's got his cell phone number and also your email address. We'll just put that up real quick.
And I do want to say, I keep getting texts from people saying, tell your candidate that I really like what he said about this, or, something like that. And I'm like, guys, you're texting and you're calling me, so just talk directly to me. I try to put on all my material cell phone number, but people still don't think. Yeah. I don't know. It's really
that's pretty unusual. Put your personal cell phone number.
Well, that's
cool. So I wanted to switch gears back, if we can, to the.
Let me just address that. This is the lowest form of elected government in our country. So, if you can't get a hold of me, there's no one else you can go to about an issue. Yeah, so you should expect that your council people make their cell phones available, because there's no other. You can't get any lower than council.
Yeah. And it's all politics is local. Yeah. You want to make a difference in your community, you should know who your city council person is. You should know who represents you. Mm-hmm. And because you are the one, if you live in District 6, they can call, and they should call.
Yeah.
Because I've tried to get a hold of the mayor for 3 years. I met her at a press conference for the Astra Tower. I was like, Mayor, come to our homelessness panel. Hear the voices of the homeless. Well, we had the panel thing and the documentary premiere, The Voices of the Homeless in Salt Lake City. I invited her personally to come. She's like, email me. I said, I'd really want, and she just goes like this. She's like, email me, get away. And it's really sad how out of touch it feels that communities are from their elected representatives, and how communities are so out of touch with local news and the things that are happening that really impact the quality of the life in their community. And I feel like the result of that emptiness, that we don't really know what's going on,
it's disengagement
and corruption.
Yeah.
I mean, just collusion and corruption and cronyism. Yeah. And it's like it just doesn't feel like the papers can go deep enough, or the local television news can go deep enough. We can't go as deep as we want to.
Well, people are busy. I mean, they're trying to get their kids to school. They're trying to put food on the table. They're trying to get to work. They're trying to get a bit of sleep. And so people are busy, and they're just assuming that their government is being run right.
Yeah. So how do you engage your constituents more and residents more to be more active and involved, so we make better decisions concerning, especially the homelessness? It's obviously so much is falling through the cracks, and we're doing a terrible job. And it looks like we're doing such a terrible job because everybody believes it's every other person's problem. It's not their problem. It's like the mayor says, it's the county problem. It's the state's problem.
Yeah, I don't like that at all.
Like, how come there's no accountability? How do you bring it back?
And while this is a common retort from the incumbent in my district, which is we don't pay for mental health resources, or we don't pay for addiction treatment resources. Well, you don't. That's correct. But we are the first point of contact with the vulnerable populations to get them into those resources. Mm-hmm. So, yes, we don't pay for a lot of resources that we use in our city, but we are the first point of contact with everyone who's in our city and helping them direct into those resources. So, for example, traditionally the state has paid for mental health treatment, and the county has paid for addiction treatment. Now, more recently, the county is going to also bring in a mental health treatment facility online. So there is the appetite from both the state and the county to fund the resources. The city now needs to take the initiative as the first point of contact through law enforcement, through first responders, firefighters, EMS. We need to take the first step to get people redirected into the triage them, and then get them directed to the right resource. I really do not. It bothers me to hear that this is a city this is a county or a state problem or a regional problem. Well, yeah, it's a national problem, but it is still the responsibility of the city to triage the most vulnerable of the populations, and then do what we can once they're triaged to direct them to the right county and state facilities for treatment, and then make sure that we're making the right housing policy so we can bring more. We can bring the right inventory onto the market.
Yeah, and the thing that I absolutely think that this was a low point for me, in my opinion, of the Salt Lake City Council. They were having this pity party 2 years ago where they're like, oh, we don't have enough homeless encampments. We're not going to build anymore because the county's not stepping up. The state's not stepping up. So we're just going to we're going to do the moratorium on building any more homeless camps or shelters or facilities. And they basically said, because we're not getting enough support. I think everybody who's in the city council and the mayor, the job you applied for, you went in knowing that people from Provo, homeless people from Provo, congregate to Salt Lake City. Ogden,
from Las Vegas,
from they're
Southern
getting
California.
One-way bus tickets because we solved homelessness in 2015. If you didn't get that news flash, Lloyd Pendleton was going all over the country saying, we solved homelessness.
Right.
And the Daily Show with Jon Stewart did a piece on it. It was hilarious. And so that was like, hey, open our arms. Yeah. And so that's the job you applied for. You can't say, "Oh, well, that's not my problem. I'm not gonna be held accountable."
Well, and the results are showing it. That's the biggest problem. Is the results are showing what happens when you stop trying to address the problem, and when you are trying to address the problem, you're doing the same things that every other city across the city is doing and expecting it to turn out different. We have very similar housing policies to some of the bigger cities in the West. We have very similar.
We're adopting failed policies, knowingly adopting failed policies.
Literally adopted. We're not stepping back, looking at the big picture, and saying, okay, Seattle tried to do this and it was an utter failure. Let's not do the same thing Seattle is doing, or let's not do the same thing that Portland is doing. These bigger cities have. We don't have to do the same things.
Yeah. Have you looked into the permanent supportive housing model we have adopted here?
The Miami model that is being
just the way it works. So I've looked in depth to permanent supportive housing and the Magnolia in particular, but I just went to the City Inn yesterday. Yeah. So our model is you can never get kicked out. Doesn't matter how many drugs you're using all day long. Doesn't matter how many neighbors and business owners you're harassing every single day. You never get kicked out. And it's just like no strings attached. And then they say they're providing wraparound services, the mental health support, the addiction support. I do not see it. And I talk to the tenants, and so many of them are mentally ill. And so many of them are just using drugs all day, every day.
Yeah.
And how do you address that problem so that you can somehow hold people personally accountable in this public housing?
Yeah, I think the first step is there needs to be a fundamental change in policymakers' minds about how accountability is not an offense to those who are struggling with addiction. There's a fundamental misunderstanding that if you try to hold someone who is struggling with addiction accountable, that you're being cruel.
Yeah.
But when you talk to people who are recovering, who are in their recovery, who have successfully reached recovery and are successfully maintaining it, they will be the first to say that accountability was the first step to my recovery. It's the only disease that the treatment is accountability. And I'm not saying that for just because I'm a jerk. I'm saying that because that's what people who have recovered I shouldn't say recovered because recovery is a lifelong process, but that's what people who are in recovery will say.
Yeah.
And I wish that our policymakers would grasp that accountability is a fundamental
Well, that's
component.
huge because unfortunately in our environment today, by saying that, you become labeled as uncompassionate. You don't care enough. You don't understand it enough.
Which is the counter. It's counterintuitive because if you don't hold someone who's struggling with addiction accountable, you're actually discompassionate for doing that because you're not giving them an opportunity to seek treatment.
Yeah,
that's the biggest fail. Now,
unless you can strap all of them into beds in mental hospitals,
right?
How else are they going to ever recover?
Right.
If you don't start holding them accountable.
Yeah.
And we had our homeless panel at Broovies almost 2 weeks ago, and the David DeRocher, who runs the Other Side Academy,
wonderful
an
person.
amazing program,
Wonderful human.
great. His first thing he said on stage was, if you do not hold accountable, you're telling us that a disease allows a person to commit crime with impunity.
Well, and it should be noted that David is someone who struggled with addiction for
20
near
years.
2 decades.
Yeah,
and so this
was a
isn't
heroin
someone
addict and
exactly
criminal.
Exactly.
And his opinion and everybody else from the Other Side Academy on that stage, this will have access to these clips very soon. They just said the key to my recovery was personal accountability. Mm-hmm. But we don't have institutional accountability for all the problems that are created. Yeah. For example, the Road Home manages the Magnolia Apartments. They manage Palmer Court. It's also drug use everywhere around there. The neighborhood's deteriorating. Wendell Apartments, Grace Mary Manor. There's public housing units everywhere, and everybody who is living near those units just say, I wish you would just get a wrecking ball and tear down those units, because those people, just like Portland does, just like Seattle, LA, they're not being held accountable and they're running amok.
Yeah, it is an execution problem. The resource is now there, the physical asset is now there, but now we're not executing right. We're not.
Yeah, they're happy to build buildings, and put people up, and those are some nice facilities. Yeah. But those wraparound services.
That's the problem. That's what's missing. Yeah. You put someone who's struggling with addiction in an apartment, and they're still struggling with addiction. Just because you put them in an apartment doesn't stop the urges and the terrors and
it could be argued you make it even worse, because I looked into the death counts of Magnolia. And
without the wraparound services, I mean, you need to get people out of the cold.
Yeah, you need to get them out of the cold.
But without the wraparound services, you put people who are struggling with addiction in one confined space, and then add to that,
and they basically isolate them,
and then add to that mental health disease. If someone's paranoid, if someone that is a recipe for really, really bad outcomes. Really bad outcomes.
And to demonstrate the gap between the service providers and the legislature, and those getting the services and the news not getting out what's going on, really. I talked to, I wonder if I can say this information, because he didn't indicate if it was on the record or off. I better not say the person who told me this. But the Road Home, who manages these facilities, got all of the funding they wanted and the renewal for their application to run all these facilities completely uncontested. There was never any any sort of debate over the job or competency of their operations in the state legislature, and it's just like we keep renewing them, giving them more and more money with zero institutional accountability.
Again, a situation that I don't have personal insight on, but the outcomes are not positive. If you drive. You don't have to have the data to know that the Magnolia is not successful. You can just drive by it.
Yeah.
What is it? 2nd East and between 1st and 2nd South. Is that right? And I was at the Gail Miller Homeless Resource Center on what's that, 3rd West and 20th South, something like that, 24th South, something like that. And you can see that there's a staff of people who are trying their damnedest to process people who are trying to get into the building, and it's overflowed. Like there's just no.
And people camp outside in front of it.
People are counting.
It's just crazy.
And it's not just them as stakeholders that are losing. There are businesses that are
Yeah, Bob Danielson
3-4
has a
blocks.
munitions shop right across the street. He's
Yeah.
actually suing.
I
I think we're breaking this story right now because it was inside information.
Yeah.
He's suing the city for a lot of money because of their incompetence in keeping the conditional use permit for that site, not holding the leaseholder accountable. I mean, the conditional use permit was given to the road home.
Yeah.
They've not held them accountable. The police force added an officer just stationed for that area, and it's just still awful. It's just unfortunate.
And I'll be honest with you, one officer for the population that they have to police.
Yeah.
It's you're trying to mop up a fire hose spill with paper towels.
Well, the Salt Lake City. Let's talk about that. Salt Lake City PD is way understaffed right now. I mean, as are many metropolitan police departments, and our safety is really in jeopardy when we have this situation on our hands as it is right now. What can you do to increase staffing to the levels it needs to be in Salt Lake City Police Department?
Yeah, so just some rough figures. Our police department budget was in 2020 was about $82 million. In 2021, we actually lowered the police budget to $78 million, and during that same period,
they lowered the budget.
We lowered the budget.
What was
first
the
time in 10
What was the thought process behind that?
I couldn't tell you.
Defund the police.
I couldn't tell you. I just know as a result of that, we lost about 40 officers, and then the city council came back and they added more mid-budget cycle. They added to the police budget. And then the news reported it as a budget increase and said, "Look what we did. We gave more money to the police, and people are going to be mad at us, but we gave more money to the police." And I thought, that's not a budget increase. That's you losing 40 officers and then needing to play catch up. Well, in the time that followed, we still lost another 40 officers.
Jeez.
And so we got from a full staff of 595 officers to 510 officers.
Well, you know what they give them the impossible job of doing, and I feel so bad for these guys. The abatements.
Yeah.
I mean, to say you got to take Don Voight, who's just homeless, a homeless senior, couldn't afford rent, and you got to take his crap and put it in a dumpster and tell him you got no place to go.
Yeah,
you just can't be here.
And oftentimes these poor officers, they're abating the same people over and over again.
Yeah,
they're just moving around and say no.
Harassing them.
They know the same.
On
they
the
know
orders
these
of the
people.
mayor.
Yeah. Well, and I would ultimately, we not only did we lose police officers, we lost the most veteran officers. We lost the ones who were good at their job because they had experience.
Yep.
So now we're in a situation where we're trying to train up new officers. It's getting your police force up to staff is not like flipping a money switch and then just hiring a bunch of people and now your problem solved.
My longtime assistant Connie, her husband, was a parole officer and an officer for years, and he brought up that point. That institutional knowledge of the veteran officers.
They make less mistakes.
Yeah, and they get it. They know how to talk down an addict who's having a huge, going on a rampage. Or if you know how to de-escalate a situation rather than being, a newbie and it escalates, that can mean the difference between life and death.
It could be the difference between that person getting into treatment and their life turning around and that person getting shot. So what I think the damage that happened by that budget decrease in 2021, I think is going to take a very long time to repair in our department from a number of perspectives. First off, just hiring new officers at a post, those officers oftentimes they get their post training, they get into the department for 2 or 3 years, and then they realize that, wait, I can go work in Summit County, I can go work in Harriman. Why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And then they bail out.
I think they got to pay them a lot more.
We need to pay them. And then the other thing that we need to do is we need to diversify the police force. And I don't mean ethnically diversify. I'm all fine. I'm a brown man. I'm fine with ethnic diversity. What I'd like to see is diversified roles in our police department so that we can not only do we have the badge and gun cops, but we have crisis intervention officers. But you can't do that at the expense of the badge and gun cops. We just need enough officers to respond to calls. And we've got a situation right now where dispatchers just don't have enough officers to dispatch.
Yeah, we had David Ibarra on the show 3 weeks ago. Do you know who he is?
I do.
Yeah, he owns a building right in downtown. Beautiful building. Great guy. Really runs an awesome business, consulting business for sales teams from auto dealerships. And he's so fed up because he was attacked after somebody was stealing stuff out of his car. And he just grabbed the guy and said, hey, that's my stuff. That's my car. Put it down. The guy wanted to fight, and he had a knife. And luckily David stopped him. He was holding this guy down.
Yeah.
And there was a crowd around for like 10, 15 minutes. The cops never showed.
Yeah.
And then even after he called them back, they said, oh, well, if the incident stopped, then we're not coming. Yeah. I mean, you get almost stabbed and you get your car robbed, and that's the response. It's just unbelievable.
And the average caller, unfortunately for the police department, the average caller blames the cop. They have that bad experience, and they think, well, the cops are a bunch of jerks. They won't respond to my call. The reason Mr. Ibarra didn't get a response is because there is a computerized priority log, and that priority log is determined by what classification the dispatcher gives, and that's just, hey, I answered the phone, I gave it this classification, and that's where it fell in the priority. And if there's not enough officers, they just won't respond. And they can't.
Yeah, how could they?
If I've seen. I mean, there are times when you can see the screen in the officer's car, and the priority log is just nonstop. I mean, they're just call to call to call.
So you can't really blame Chief Mike Brown if the pay is not what it needs to be to get enough officers. You can't really. I mean, whoever decided to cut the budget, you don't know if that was the mayor, or city councils, or was that during the defund the police movement?
It was during the defund movement.
That's got to be it. And the downtown ambassadors, they were given the very tough job of trying to handle mentally ill people, and I watched that myself.
Yeah,
they would go by, and some guy's going crazy on his meth, and then they're trying to say, "Hey, calm down. It's all going to be okay." But I mean, isn't that more than the competency of a downtown ambassador to be able to deal with?
It is, and you need even the resource is good. Are you talking about the
yellow coat folks? Yeah. And I think that they were doing a lot of that on Main Street, and it seemed like they moved the homeless off of Main Street.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not part of their assignment anymore, but
they don't just disappear. Those people don't just disappear. They need somewhere to go. You still need an officer to be able to respond if that ambassador gets into trouble, because they're dealing with a population that's struggling with some pretty serious problems with addiction, with paranoia, with
Yeah, well, we have a mental health crisis on our hands, and I think the way LA handled it, they created a mental health crisis team that's kind of like officers. And if I'm correct,
they are
if I'm wrong,
part of the LAPD, I believe.
Or they're a unit of the LAPD.
I think they're a unit, but they're not deputized officers. They're not badge and gun officers. Yeah.
And I think they're doing something similar in San Francisco and New York, because it's just COVID created mental health problems across the board in kids, in parents. Like, we were borderline mentally ill trying to deal with
and these problems are saturating for a long
and then
time.
the most vulnerable, it affected the most. I think we're still trying to recover mentally from that isolation that so many people were in that just couldn't really get out of. It's just like that.
Well, and I would argue that it brought to the forefront a problem that was already there, but that we weren't really thinking about as a society. I don't know if we talked about this statistic, but if you go back to 1965 in Utah, our state had available 3,000 inpatient beds for mental health treatment for a total population of 800,000 people.
3,000 in 1965.
1965
Wow.
for 800,000 people statewide.
Wow.
Today we have 300 beds for 3.3 million people.
That's insane.
And the balance of those people are now incarcerated. So the graph, the overlay of those two figures as a ratio is like this. In other words, we're incarcerating those people just didn't get better. We're putting them in jail. And so I would argue that COVID just emphasized and brought to the forefront what the pervasiveness of the mental health crisis in our state. And we have, thankfully, I will say, the legislature and the University of Utah president, they've acknowledged the problem, and they're working diligently towards a solution. There's really two solutions. Number one is just money, good old-fashioned, let's build beds. And when I say build beds, both existing resources, the University of Utah just added 30 beds. It's a drop in the bucket, but it's something. And then
what was formerly Uni, now it's the Huntsman Psychiatric Hospital or something like that, right?
And then the other thing that I thought was really brilliant of President Taylor Randall at the university was this idea that we can adjust credentialing requirements for mental health providers for those cases that are lower acuity. As an example, if you're an NP or a PA, you can treat a cold. You don't need to be an MD to treat a cold.
Yeah.
But if you're a master's or a BS in a mental health related field, you cannot treat mental health disease in any form and at any acuity.
If you say that again.
If you have a Bachelor of Science or a master's in the field,
you cannot treat any mental disorder.
Not in Utah.
You have to have a PhD.
You have to have an MD or a PhD. Taylor Randall, I think, noticed an opportunity where, for lower acuity cases, if the state would if the legislature, and I think they're going to take it up this session, if the state will lower the credentialing requirements for lower acuity cases, those that are not as serious, then two things will happen. Number one, most importantly, we will add supply for mental health care providers. We will open up the supply of mental health care providers and allow the MDs and PhDs to focus on the highest acuity cases. But number two, we'll create a situation where people can get jobs. They don't have to go into more debt to get a job, to get a higher degree and get a job. They can get a job with their existing degree.
That would make a lot of sense.
That would be awesome.
You have the caseworkers. Turnover is like the police turnover, very, very high, low pay. Caseworkers are overloaded, and the homeless people I interviewed, they're like, oh yeah, my caseworker lasted 2 weeks, and then I had another one, she lasted another 2 weeks.
They're not making a relationship with their...
No, and that model, it seems to be also generally a failure. The caseworkers, bless them. I mean,
they're trying with no resources.
They are trying so hard.
Yeah.
And they're doing their best. And I know caseworkers, they're awesome people. But that model seems to be failing. The peer-to-peer model that the Other Side Academy operates under and that the Switchpoint operates under, that has proven to be highly effective for addicts. I don't know that it's being applied for mental illness. But it just seems like even if you are an addict and or have some mental illness problems, being not isolated seems to be a very good way to go. And I wanted to talk about the In Between and play a clip. That is a stellar facility that is in your district. It's run by Jillian Olmstead. She's the CEO. They got all this pushback in the neighborhood when they were going to open a homeless resource center in just
Fisher
off of
Six,
Foothill,
yeah.
just off 13th East.
Yeah.
And they've proven to be an awesome neighbor, just like the other side Academy, because they provide this beautiful facility. You walk in, there's flowers everywhere.
Yeah.
There's warm lighting. Jillian told me about a case where a woman named, I believe her name was Rita, she was mentally ill, and she was angry and belligerent, and she was dying. That's the specialty of the In-Between. They help people who are terminally ill, mostly, and some people who just need respite from hospital care. But the people who come out of there come out with hope. And this lady Rita, had all these mental health problems, and she was supposed to die. The LA Times wrote the story about this. This is a really amazing article by the LA Times. She recovered, and she became a worker at the In-Between. She's now there every day working, helping maintain the facilities. Other people who work there maintain the facilities. This beautiful, awesome model. Yeah. But it's not being replicated, and the In-Between doesn't get any government financing. And I'm just amazed that model can exist, and it's just not being copied.
Well, and as a side thought, I want to just emphasize, as an anecdote, that person, oftentimes, I think people look at homeless populations as nuisances, but they can just as easily be valuable contributors to society.
And good neighbors.
And
if they get a little bit of compassion in their care.
And an opportunity. I mean, it's the right resources, the right treatment, and then an opportunity to take advantage of it.
Yeah, an opportunity. We're going to give you some dignity. Yeah. Our staff's going to work with you directly. Yeah. So this is Jillian Olmsted's comment, who runs the In-Between, from our panel, and I just wanted to play that clip for you. This is... I'll just tell you, this was at Broovies 2 weeks ago. We premiered a film called The Voices of Utah's Homeless, and then we had a two panel discussions about it. And is that going to work?
I'm not getting the audio, sorry.
Okay, so what she says from her perspective is we are not providing affordable housing. We're not providing homeless enough shelter space. So the result is what we're seeing: more mental illness, more drug addiction, because we're not treating those vulnerable people like we saw at the beginning, Dawn, with enough dignity so they can get off the streets. So they get stuck, they get addicted, they become mentally ill. And the system we have now is obviously failing. I mean, we've talked about it a lot, but why? I mean, couldn't we take the In-Between model and replicate it? What's preventing that from happening, do you think?
I think the biggest thing preventing it is probably that it became a model by accident. Nobody was actually trying. No policymaker was striving for that to happen. But the people who were running it got the formula,
and they have passion for doing what they're doing,
and they believe in what they're doing. Yeah. They really believe in it, and they have passion for it. But policymakers need to take notice of successes like that, and not just keep saying, "Oh, people are homeless. We need to build more housing." Yeah, you need to build it as a triage. But what are you going to do once you have people in housing? What are you going to do with people? Because
that's way more important. Yeah. I mean, it's I guess you could say it's just as important to have that support
as a triage,
as the housing itself.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because you still haven't solved the problem, and you might have exacerbated it by putting people in close quarters who are not treated, and have a unique set of struggles that are as unique as every individual who's in deeply affordable housing.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a reason they're
and you know what's interesting?
Housing.
Also on that panel was a woman named Marina Rogers, who's really got this great organization off the ground, Mental Health America of Utah, and she got funding. She was in the Ramada providing this care. She's providing the wraparound services, and she says the road home is not embracing her care.
Yeah.
They don't want to see their tenants be getting that special care that she can provide. And her model is peer-to-peer support. So it's a lot of support groups. It's like I think she said they do some yoga, they do crafts, they do exercises to get people reconnected with each other who are in their shells, are just sort of in that hunker down fight or flight mode. And it's like that's what she believes is required, and she got a lot of funding. And the road home is saying, it's okay, we're good.
Yeah.
And I can't believe
and that's
that.
such an opportunity for policymakers to step in and say, look, you're getting government funding. You need to engage with certain resources to optimize the product you're providing for people who are on the street.
Mm-hmm.
That's such a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So I hope that people watching this tonight can be more engaged, can get the facts, because there's a lot going on. Like when we first started our homeless coverage 2.5 years ago, you just see this mess. And people tend to blame the homeless themselves, like, oh, you losers and bums, just get off the street. We don't want to see you. And it's like, that is just, you got to have compassion for people's stories, because right now, just statistically, 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, one paycheck away from being homeless. And a lot of people just can't afford housing anymore. And
and addiction, addiction can come from a number of different places. Addiction can come from you were at a party and tried it once. But more often than not, those who are chronically homeless, it comes from they are trying to escape a mental illness. They're trying to escape an economic condition, even briefly for a moment, just trying to escape the feeling of feeling cold or feeling like your partner left you because you couldn't keep a roof over your heads, or you have deep paranoia that you are trying to escape by applying a chemical to it. All of those things, anyone who struggled with alcoholism, I think could speak to that. A lot of people who've struggled with alcoholism, and a lot of people who have struggled with harder drugs than alcohol, can speak to, it's not just you screwed up.
Well, and a lot of these people, I'd say by far the majority of them come from broken homes, and intergenerational broken families. And
the cycle has to stop somewhere.
Yeah, and it just keeps happening. And I think that one thing I notice, my kid has some behavioral problems, and if you just talk to my kid, it's like it's almost like a lot of people have not progressed their behavioral insight into their own issues enough to where they can overcome them, or come to terms with them on their own. And it just seems like the underlying behavior, which results in chemical dependency, psychological disorders, it seems like that at the lowest rung of the economic ladder, this intergenerational poverty, those are extreme, those behaviors. And they legitimize theft, they legitimize crime. It's rage against the machine. Let's be apathetic. There's a neo-Marxist element there. And it's unfortunate, because I feel like that sentiment is not diminishing, it's growing. And I think the free market, we talked about this a little last time, knowing that the best of America is the free market economy. It's small businesses, it's entrepreneurs who are perhaps immigrants coming into our country, want to start something great, build it up from the bottom.
As a fourth generation one yourself, and as a second generation one myself.
It's like, I feel like that spirit is what's made America great, what's made this country succeed. And I really hope that can be fostered, especially in universities, where it seems like you're getting more of the neo-Marxism now than ever.
I agreed with so much you said, except for let's not badmouth Zach De La Roche and Rage Against the Machine. They're figment of my
I went to them in concert
childhood.
Back in the 90s.
So,
anyway. No offense, Rage Against the Machine.
So.
Yeah, well, Taymour, it's been fun.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on.
And thank you for giving a voice to so many of the policymakers and the stakeholders. I know you've had everyone from council people up to business owners. In one case, one is a council person and a small business owner.
Oh, yeah.
But thank you for giving those people a voice and for this great institution and keeping it healthy. So.
Yeah, well, thank you. Yeah, and thank you everyone for watching. We would love to hear your comments. Like I really appreciate the well thought out comments that we usually get on our recorded programs. And Taymour would love to hear from you. We're going to put his number and email on the screen right now. Anything that's concerning you, any thoughts or ideas or comments you have, send them off to Taymour. Of course, you can put them in the comments and below. I'm sure Taymour is going to read those as well. And this program has been brought to you by Utah Stories. This is our current issue. I am very proud of this issue. Cover designed by a local illustrator. It's about the fire of Park City of right around 1920. Most of Park City burned down. We've got a story about the Topaz internment camp, Japanese internment camp that was during World War II right here in Utah. Excellent story. Hermit who lived in the canyons of Utah. I'm just really proud of the contributors we have this month, and then I did a story, building growth leaves the unsheltered out of the equation, building for growth. It's just like we're unfortunately not pulling it off. But your support of this magazine makes this possible. It's $3 to subscribe to Utah Stories. You can go to utahstories.com to subscribe, or you can become a member of Utah Stories and get free VIP tickets to our special events. We're going to have film premieres every quarter. It was a really fun event. I really enjoyed it. I think we almost sold out. We had only like 5 seats left. And I really want to thank the team who helped out. Troy, Alex, MJ, Golda, Allegra, MP. You guys are super awesome. Thank you so much for all your support and your hard work in pulling off that really complicated event. We had to have audio for up to 9 panelists, and they did an awesome job. So thank you so much for watching. Also, please subscribe to this channel if you like this content, and hit that notification bell icon so you get alerted when we come out with new stuff. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.